Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Maria Palante, and I am the United States Register of Copyrights and the Director of the U.S. Copyright Office. And I'd like to say at the outstart that for me this is a very wonderful privilege because, as you may or may not know, because of the long history of copyright law in the Library of Congress, this Jefferson building is quite literally the house that copyright built. And with that, let me start by just introducing briefly the distinguished panel that we have. Their bios in depth, of course, in the program and online. But to my immediate left is Tom Allen, who is a former congressman from Maine and is presently the president and the chief executive officer of the Association of American Publishers. To his left is James Shapiro, who is a professor of English and a Shakespearean scholar and an author, and vice president of the Authors Guild. He's a professor at Columbia University. Thank you for coming down from New York, Jim. And did you also come down from New York?
This week I was here.
This week you were in Washington. You're everywhere. And to James's left, we have Peter Yazzie, who's a professor of copyright law at the Washington College of Law, American University, is also an author. And I will say, although Peter would not want me to, was recently given the great honor by his colleagues at the Washington College of Law to have a lecture named after him. So congratulations, Peter, and thank you for joining us. So our topic is copyright and the book, very small topic. Copyright and the book, authors, publishers, and the public interest. And I wanted to reflect on the title for just a moment because copyright in the book is at its core a discussion about the public interest, with authors and publishers as part of the public interest. And I would underscore that because I think sometimes in some of the more recent conversations in political circles, it's sometimes teed up as a conversation where authors and publishers are somehow antithetical to, or at least in competition with, the goals of the public, and that is not the foundational history of copyright law in the United States. So today, we're going to have a discussion about how the book brings together or brings into focus all of the important societal goals with respect to copyright law: incentivizing authors, valuing publishers, serving readers, and protecting freedom of expression. But we're also going to talk about how changes in the book industry, including new formats, new methods of dissemination, and consumer expectations, are revealing the need for legal change. Now, many people talk about the need for copyright reform, and people mean different things when they talk about it. But I will say, from my perspective, on behalf of the U.S. Copyright Office, it is clear to us that many provisions in the Copyright Act require review and updating, and the great challenge is how we reflect the digital age in which we live with the foundational principles of a copyright system as laid out in the Constitution. And so with that, I'd like to start with the very thoughtful professor on the end and say, Peter, could you say a few words about how evolution of the book may be a cause for both progress and tension in the copyright law, including for such long-cherished tenets as, say, the first sale doctrine?
I will do my best. Thank you. Thank you, Maria, for the very generous introduction and for the invitation itself. It's a tremendous and really a very special pleasure to be here today talking to this audience in this space about this subject. The other thing I like about the framing of this panel is that it relieves me of a problem that I often have when I talk about this topic of copyright in the public interest. That is, what to call the mass of individuals whose individual and collective well-being is implicated in the constitutional language that frames our copyright system and in everything that courts have said over the years about copyright policy and its ultimate public objectives, as Maria has described them. It's a problem to call them users because it suggests to a sort of a role that I think is too passive. The same is true, perhaps even more true, of consumers. Citizens is a little vague and perhaps sort of over inclusive. But today I don't have to worry about that. I can just say that we're talking about a public of readers. And those are old readers and young readers. They are sophisticated readers and casual readers. They are sighted readers and blind readers, all readers together. So to begin, what do all these readers like about printed books? As I was trying to think of themes here, I went to the wonderful Elizabeth Eisenstein's new book, Divine Art, Infernal Machine, The Response to Print in the West from First Impressions to a Sense of an Ending, now out in paperback, I'm happy to say. And Professor Eisenstein suggests two answers to the question, what do readers like about the book, drawn, of course, from the history of the early reception of print. And one answer, I think, is that readers from the very beginning, from the 15th century forward, have responded very positively to the fixity of the book, the apparent stability that printed pages bound between stiff material gives to texts and to their meanings. She writes, "Printing came to be known as the divine art partly because it was regarded as the art which preserved all other arts. But somewhat paradoxically, as Eisenstein points out, early readers, like readers today, also valued something different about the book, what might be referred to as the velocity of print. The ability to multiply copies meant that texts and their meanings could and did move with new speed from hand to hand and mind to mind, that the book was both literally and figuratively unchained by this innovation in the mode of production." And here, if I had slides, which I don't, I would show the slide of the old hand-copied volume chained to the desk of the monastery in order to emphasize my point. Eisenstein cites the early cleric and editor Giandrea Debussy, writing in 1468, for his association of print with the generous act of sharing what was hoarded. So we've got the fixity of print on the one hand, which is very appealing to readers, and we've got the velocity of print on the other hand, which has an associated equal and sometimes contradictory appeal. So it is fair to ask, what does copyright have to do with all this? And I think later we'll have a chance, I hope we'll have a chance to talk about the ways in which many decisions that have been taken over time and will be taken in the future about copyright policy either enable or potentially disable the survival and the flowering of the book. But I want to talk about just one of the default settings of Anglo-American copyright law, one that dates from a time long before we had a name for it. That is the rule that after an authorized first sale, as we would say today, of a particular copy of a book, the copyright owner generally has no residual authority to restrain its subsequent alienation, whether by further sale or by gift or by lending or in any other way we can imagine. This venerable, even ancient rule was affirmed by the United States Supreme Court in 1908 and reaffirmed by Congress in 1909 and again in 1976. But however old, first sale is no mere accident of history. The doctrine is consistent with broadly shared social values of freedom and autonomy, and with the, as Maria mentioned, the instrumental goals of copyright to encourage the creation and the broad dissemination, primary dissemination and secondary dissemination of knowledge. Over time, by keeping copyright within bounds, including the bounds imposed by the first sale doctrine, we've been successful in sustaining and even perhaps accelerating the velocity of print. And there have